Hello. I'm so excited. Happy, what are we on Wednesday, y'all? 4:45. We're live. We're live on TikTok. We're live on YouTube. I think we're on class 8. And we're going to be covering chapters 11. And if we make it through 12, it's my goal is to make it through 12 today. How are y'all doing? I'm going to give it a little bit for everybody to get in. All right. Let me go to where my comments are so I can see. Okay. Hello out there. All right. I'm pretty excited. Okay, so we're going over chapter 11 today, which is going to cover our complex surgical instruments. Last Monday, we talked about some of our basic surgical instruments that we will find in any type of service line. Service lines referring to what type of surgical tray. So if it's orthopedic or gynecological or vascular, thoracic. There are some surgical instruments that are just pretty standard. They're going to be found in any kind of service line. But then there's more complex instrumentation that may be more specific to certain service lines. So we're going to learn about those today. We're also going to learn about what makes them complex. The surgical instruments that we looked at on Monday were more standard, just metal pressed into a shape. They didn't have a whole lot of components to them, maybe a ratchet that closes, but not a lot to them. So they're more, I'm going to just keep saying basic. There was more basic, not a whole lot to them compared to this more complex surgical instrumentation. And then chapter 12 is over assembly and packaging. So we'll be looking at not necessarily identifying surgical instrumentation, but getting it ready for sterilization. All right, so let me get over here to my chat. I see some comments. Hello, hi Letitia, hi Chrisette, good evening, Andrea. Okay, where's my little notebook? I'm gonna keep track of where you guys are at in the reading. Lord Jesus. Oh, let's look at this today too. I haven't done much with that. I did prepare a little like midterm quiz just to check and see where we are as far as the concepts are concerned. Because again, I remind you guys, it's your class, so we don't have to rush through any of this stuff. Want to make sure you understand what it is. She said not the vocals, be dead. The vocals. All right. Let me see where I'm at. Okay, so drop in the chat for me where you guys are at on the reading. We are well into March. Happy Women's Month, ladies. All right. Where we at with our reading? Oh, Nikki's in here. She don't ever say hi. Chapter 13. Hi, Sabu. All right, TCI. Sabu's on 13. Where we at? Letitia, Andrea, Chrisette, chapter 11. And while everybody's getting that, I did have opportunity to go ahead and upload the notes onto the website yesterday. I had to relinquish that demon of perfection. because I got stuck in my mind of wanting to rearrange them all to be the exact same format as if that was going to matter to you guys in the long run. And then I realized I was just doing too much. So I posted everything that we have looked at so far, including what we're going over tonight, is already up on the Candray Institute website. You can go over there and download it. I also put the quizzes that we've done in there as well. And you will see in the chapter notes that some of the chapters I have quizzes that we've done at the end of the chapter as review, and those are included with the answer keys. So if you use them to challenge yourself, just be mindful that you'll have to cover up your answer keys, okay? But that being said, you also, of course, since you guys have all purchased the textbooks, have your workbooks that have chapter quizzes in them as well. So have you guys had an opportunity to utilize that at all? I know I haven't talked about it, but you guys do have it. Okay, Letitia, I see 13. Who did I miss? Chris said, oh, I didn't miss nobody. Andre, are you doing the reading? I don't know that I've seen you. Have I seen you? Have I seen you in class before? Okay, yes, a little bit. Chris said, are you finding that useful at all? I'm just being nosy right now. Are you finding the workbook quizzes useful as far as helping you remember the information that you're reading? Andrea on chapter 11? Okay, then you've definitely been with me. Okay, good. All right, wonderful. I'm glad. All right, if you're just coming in, if you can drop down where you are in the reading. Sabu, you found that useful? Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. Every couple of years, HSPA reviews the content of the books and the quizzes. So I always like to keep an ear out on how people are finding that content, if they're finding it useful, especially since you guys are self-studying. Because most often people will pay for a class. Like if I was doing this traditionally, it would be a paid class. So I'm just always curious if it's helpful, because I took the test after being in the field for about 5 years already. So it's a little different for me than it is for you guys using it and coming straight in. All right. Enough with the apps. Okay. All right, so we're going to do chapter 11. Got the notes up there for you. Please let me know if I am reading things that you do not see on the screen, because that just means that I haven't flipped the page. It does exist. All right. Any questions over the past content before we move into chapters 11 and 12? Because especially now that you guys are getting so caught up on the reading, I'm starting to get a little bit worried because I ain't got no questions about the past content yet. Or am I just doing that fabulous of a job? Mm-hmm. Okay, Chris said no. All right. Well, y'all let me know. Keep up on those flashcards. And let's get into chapter 11 and 12. Okay, so chapter 11 of the HSPA textbook covers complex surgical instruments. And complex surgical instruments are those that require specialized cleaning, handling, and sterilization. And that's also going to lead into you needing to do proper reprocessing to ensure patient safety, instrument longevity, and compliance with regulatory standards. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. That is wonderful feedback. I'm glad to hear it. Even been doing some on ProProofs. What is this? I'm not familiar with that. Share the website if you don't mind. Okay, so that being said, complex instrumentation, as I was explaining at the beginning of the class, is surgical instrumentation. However, it's built in a way that makes it difficult to clean. So you have to follow certain processes or procedures to make sure that you're cleaning it effectively. It's not going to be as simple as like if I go to my kitchen cabinet and I pull out a fork, that's just pressed metal. There's nothing real complicated about that. I can wipe the outside down and it's good to go. But if that same fork was made out of that metal and then wrapped in plastic and had fiber optics running through it, it's going to be a little bit more complicated. So the definition of complex instruments is that they are multi-part and delicate or technologically advanced. Sometimes you guys are even going to be dealing with robotic surgical instruments. So it can go from something, like we said, something very basic to something that has a computer chip in it, or it has a computer itself. They require special handling, cleaning, and reprocessing to ensure proper function and patient safety. And this could come down to something as simple as it not being able to be submerged because of what it's made out of. If I dunk it in water, it'll flood its motor, it'll flood its computer system, and then it won't work anymore. It could also require special machines to reprocess it because of the channels that are connected to it. So it really just depends on the instrumentation itself. Oh, nice. Okay, I'm going to check this out. Pro proofs. All right, so some examples of complex instruments include endoscopes, which are rigid, semi-rigid, and flexible. These are the scopes that we're using to gain visibility when the surgeons are doing minimally invasive procedures, right? So the same as you would have a telescope, these scopes are sometimes they're wrapped in pure metal and they're very rigid. They don't move. You can't bend them. Some of them are what we consider semi-rigid, where they may have some mechanisms inside of them that let them move to some degree, but it's not like it has a full range of motion. And then versus a flexible endoscope, which does offer more of a full head range of motion. Then we have laparoscopic instruments, which we've talked about a few times already, but the laparoscopic instruments are those tubular ones that they're going to use inside of your minimally invasive procedures. So these are going to typically be metal that has some type of wiring system that's running inside of it, or that's coated in a rubber material that you guys will be responsible for checking to make sure it's intact, because it gets connected to electrical circuits and you want to make sure that none of that electricity is seeping out beyond the surgical instrument itself. Then we have arthroscopic instruments, which are, these are, how would I describe arthroscopic instruments? These are highly specialized, like cutting and rongeurs that are used for things like ankle surgeries. So a space where I cannot use the typical very large heads that we saw on like our Mayo and Met scissors, things of that nature. Hopefully your books have, I'm not sure for the 9th edition, but hopefully your books have some pictures of those. Otherwise, if you haven't seen them, I just highly suggest just do a Google search. You don't necessarily need to identify surgical instruments for your test as far as visually being able to say, oh, this is a Metzenbaum scissor, things of that nature. But just to familiarize yourself with it. Then robotic surgical instruments are just what they sound like. They look very similar to laparoscopic instruments, but they have a computer system that's attached to them and that they plug into. Then we have power surgical tools, which are drills, saws, or phaco hand pieces. There's also a wider range of power surgical tools, but we'll talk about those later on in the chapter. And then the last one is loaner instruments. Now, loaner instruments is kind of a catch-all phrase because loaner instruments can quite literally be anything that I loan from one facility to the next, right? So we've talked about that earlier in the class, that within health systems, we might not maintain the same quantity of surgical instruments at each place. So if they need to, they may borrow or loan out surgical instruments from one facility to the next. This could be intercampus, or this could be between totally independent facilities. Also, you have a third-party component in which the manufacturers of these instruments will loan them out to the facilities themselves. So it will be going between the manufacturer and their representatives in the hospital system. It works in a way that the hospital doesn't have to spend a lot of money on some very, very expensive and complex surgical instruments, but maintain access to them and be able to provide those services. So loaner instrumentation really could be across any service line, but you will also find through working in the field that oftentimes it's a lot of orthopedics, a lot of spine, these very multi-level systems that require, how would I say this? Because I don't want to just keep saying it requires specialized instrumentation. But like, for instance, you might have to have on top of your set to fix a knee, you might have to have a set that allows me to build a new kneecap. That's not instrumentation that I may have in my facility. This manufacturer may have it, but that set of instrumentation may be 15 different trays that allows the surgeon to put that thing together, right? So it becomes its own beast. All right, so let's talk about specific instrumentation. We're going to take a look at rigid endoscopes first. I appreciate you liking the live. All right. And on a friendly reminder, I know y'all know, but I'm working out of the 8th edition. So if there's anything that I'm not covering that you are going over in your 9th and you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Okay, so here's some examples from my text of what rigid endoscopes look like. You can see that. And these are straight, non-flexible endoscopes with a series of lenses that provides direct visualization to internal structures. What does that mean? We've talked about it quite a few times already. You could think of it as a camera lens. But these scopes go into the body and through a series of mirrors that refract the light back and forth between what's happening in the body and what the surgeon can see at the lens, it provides a picture of the inside of the body. So they're commonly used in laparoscopy. Anytime you see scopy, scope, that's what it's going to need. Anytime they are doing a visualization of anything, it's going to need a scope. Scopes come in various sizes. You can have some as small as 2-3 millimeters for arthroscopies or ankle surgeries. You can have them as large as 10-15 millimeters for a gastric surgery. Right? So they work across service lines. They're made of stainless steel and optical lenses. And they have some special cleaning considerations. So if your scope has any attachment to it, which usually it does, I'm going to try to get this up there, but let me see if I pop this down. You'll be able to better see this. Okay. All right. So this is the rigid endoscope itself. And here there's an adapter that is attached to it. Now that adapter screws off. So this is something that you would disassemble. You would take these pieces apart during the cleaning process. This adapter allows you to attach a light cord. The light cord pushes light through these lenses that are inside of all this stainless steel. Okay. So the scope itself, that's how all of them essentially work. It's just going to be what are they wrapped in and what else is in there that allows it to either move or not move. If it moves, it's flexible. If it doesn't, it's rigid. If it moves a little bit, it's semi-rigid. Okay. So first you got to take all the pieces apart because if any blood or anything has dropped down in between all those screws, you want to be able to get it out. And this is one of those things where you need to keep the pieces together because that adapter goes to that scope. You lose it, somebody's got to buy it. Okay. You're going to rinse them thoroughly after you manually clean them with soft brushes and detergents. You don't want to be using rough materials with these. They are delicate. All of those mirrors and lights that are inside of those scopes are very delicate. If you drop them, you could damage one of their light poles and it has to go out for repair. And they're very expensive to purchase and very expensive to repair. And it does happen. Not saying you got to be a perfect person, but handle them with care. All right. Then you want to rinse it thoroughly before sterilization. You want to dry it. These are they have delicate optical components, so be gentle. And then you want to make sure you get it completely dry before you send it off to that processing side. Okay. Next page. Okay, so semi-rigid scopes. They don't have a good picture of that one. Here we go. They don't have the best picture of this one for me. Hopefully they have updated that and gave you better things. There it is. So this is an example of a semi-rigid scope. You can see that that scope is very much thinner than that previous scope that we looked at. Okay, so it just has some movement. And oftentimes it will have a lot more ports to it or open cannulas that may have tops that come on and off, things that need to be removed. So another space where you're going to have to do some disassembly. Okay, so common uses, you're going to see them in your ureteroscopy cases. You're going to see them with ENT, ear, nose, and throat cases. You saw how slender that scope was. You're going to see them used in those spaces. Considerations, they require special handling to prevent kinking of any of the cords and to prevent breaking. They're more flexible than the rigid. That doesn't move at all, right? But they're not bendable. You can't just take it and flex it in half. It's not a flexible endoscope. So again, you want to be gentle, and they must be leak tested to ensure integrity before use. So because these semi-rigid scopes have flushing cannulas that are attached to them, you have to leak test them and make sure that they are intact. We don't want to be pushing fluids into a patient or trying to extract fluids from a patient and there's a hole in our scope and these things are leaking out, right? So part of that efficacy test to see if the instrument is working the way it's supposed to is going to be leak testing it before we pass it on to the processing side. Then lastly, for endoscopes, we have flexible scopes. These are highly maneuverable. They're long tube-like instruments with fiber optics or digital imaging for internal visualization. So these have the camera systems inside of them. They have the mirrors inside of them, but they also have pulley systems inside of them that allow them to move back and forth. Usually the metal that helps to create the shape of it is very intricate. You could almost think of it like the cheese grater. There are so many holes so close together and it's all wrapped in rubber. So it can, if it gets a hole in it from the outside, it will need to go out for repair because you would have flooding coming from externally and internally. But also you could have damage to that pulley system. You could have damage to the lens systems. And if you're not getting visualization, then your scope is not useful. All right, so common uses with the flexible endoscopes, they're used in gastrointestinal procedures, bronchoscopies, and ENT procedures. There's almost no service line that doesn't have a flexible endoscope that it uses, to be quite honest. They contain fiber optic and video components, and they are challenging to clean due to their narrow lumens, their working channels, and their ports. So just like that semi-rigid scope had those channels that we can do some flushing through, flexible endoscopes will have ports for that nature. They will also have working channels that you can push surgical instruments through, and the surgeon is able to work through the flexible scope. So all of those tiny little holes mean it's really hard to clean it. It's very challenging. They will have extremely explicit instructions for use. You must learn them and you must follow them. You cannot clean every flexible scope the exact same way because of how they're made. So it's very important that you pay attention to that. It's also why, because it's so complex, it's also why HSPA has a separate certification that you can get as a certified endoscope reprocessor because it's that serious, okay? Flexible scopes also have their own AMI guidelines. They have SGNA guidelines, like it's its own beast. And depending on your facility, the flexible scope reprocessing technicians that work in your sterile processing department may be in a whole separate area of the facility. They may not reprocess with the same surgical instruments that you do. All right, so some other considerations. You want to make sure that you store these properly. They must hang in a vertical position when they're drying, and they must have ventilation. These are heavily surveyable. If you do not store these properly, you will get cited. If you do not have records of you cleaning these properly, you will get cited. And part of the reason why is because these flexible endoscopes are not being exposed to a terminal sterilization. These are going to be high-level disinfection, right? Which we've covered previously. So we know that that cleans a lot of things, but not all the things. You want to keep it in an environment that doesn't encourage microbial growth. Ain't no point in cleaning the scope and then hanging it in a warm, moist environment. All right. And then lastly, on considerations for that one, it requires extensive manual cleaning and high-level disinfection or sterilization. Now, there are some flexible scopes now that are certified to go into sterilizers, whether that be a low temp, like a hydrogen peroxide or an ethylene oxide gas, or going in high temp in the steam sterilizers. It's going to depend on what? The IFU. So you have to make sure you're checking the instructions for use. Somebody was late. Yes. So the question was, will the slide be posted for later review? Yes. If you're on the YouTube, you're going to look in the live section. You will be able to find all the past recordings of the class, including this one. Now, I do think it takes a little bit for it to show up there after the live. But check back there and you'll be able to find it. Also, since you were late, do also check the website. I do have it updated with all of the class notes and quizzes that we've had so far up through tonight's class with chapter 11 and 12. All right. Thank you over there on TikTok. I appreciate it. Okay, so we have covered all the things endoscopes. Let's talk about reprocessing them. Okay, so with the flexible endoscopes, we're just going to go over 5 very basic steps to cleaning flexible endoscopes. But just like I said previously, endoscopes all have their own instructions for use that will give you step-by-step guides. Some of them are even so beautiful, they have pictures. Some of these companies now even have videos for you guys to watch. Because it really is that complicated at times to clean them. But these are some basic things that you will always have to do and should be a red flag to you to ask a question if you're not having to do these things, okay? So first step is pre-cleaning. Just like all of our other instruments, there's going to be point of use cleaning that happens at the site. And then there's going to be pre-cleaning that happens in the decontam room, okay? Pre-cleaning is going to be performed immediately after use at the point of care. They're going to flush all the lumens with water and enzymatic cleaner. Sometimes this is a foam, sometimes it's a liquid. And they're going to do that to prevent organic matter from trying, right? So we've talked about that during the decontamination chapter. We don't want anything to dry. We want to keep everything moist. So they're going to remove gross soil, and then they're going to keep that instrument moist until it gets to the decontam room. Then when it arrives in the decontam room, we're going to do leak testing. Before we clean this instrument, before we submerge it in water, we want to test it and make sure that it does not have any leaks. Why? Because if it does, we do not want to further damage it by submerging it in water and having that water and enzymatic cleaner flood the inside of that instrument, okay? So we're going to leak test it first. And that's going to be performed using air or water immersion methods. It's going to depend on your facility, okay? And then step 3, we're going to do manual cleaning. Now that we've leak tested it, we make sure that it doesn't have any holes, all the rubber coating is intact. We're going to go ahead and put it fully into the water and start our manual cleaning. So we're going to disassemble, remove any components that come apart, anything that screws off, clips off, going to take that off. Submerge it. Then we're going to use enzymatic detergent and an appropriate size brush. Now, I know you guys have heard me talk about the sizes of brushes before, so I'm not going to belabor this, but all of those lumens can have different sizes. From some are 1 millimeter all the way up to 20, 30 some odd millimeters. It just depends on what it is that's being used. I cannot take a 1 millimeter brush and clean a 22 millimeter hole. It's just falling in. There's nothing happening. Okay. So the brush size has to match the cannula. It has to match the cannula. If you are pushing a brush into a cannula and you gotta shove it in, it doesn't fit. You need to get an appropriate size brush. Okay, because you don't want to be doing more damage. You don't want to be scraping against the sides. You don't want to hurt the thing. You want to clean it. So then we're going to use our enzymatic detergent and we're going to clean it with our brushes and we're going to scrub it and flush it with detergent and rinse it thoroughly, with that final rinse being always deionized water. Then step number 4, we're going to do the high-level disinfection. So once we cleaned it, we removed all the gross soil. We're going to do high-level disinfection or sterilization based off of the instructions for use. Okay. Sometimes this might require you to use what we call an automated endoscope reprocessor. This is similar to the automated washers in the decontam space. However, this is specifically designed for high-level disinfection of flexible scopes. Okay, so it's going to have some detergents or some high-level disinfectants that are inside the machine. You're going to put the flexible scope inside the machine, and then you're going to press start, and it's going to do its thing. And then I just talked about this, but there are some that can withstand sterilization. That might be with a gas. So that what that looks like is a chamber that you will put the scope inside of after it's been wrapped in a sterilization product, whatever wrap or peel pack it comes in, and then you would put a gas cartridge into that machine, and it would expose it to ethylene oxide, and that would be how it would achieve its sterilization process. And then outside of that, some of them now can handle high heat, so you may be able to do steam sterilization or hydrogen peroxide sterilization. Okay. When you are doing a high-level disinfection, when you're doing high-level disinfection, you have to rinse the instrument free of whatever the disinfectant was right now. So this could really be common sense. But if I'm washing something with bleach and then I take it out the sink, I gotta rinse the bleach off. I can't just leave it on there. I hope I didn't say something that was brand new to somebody today. Okay, so we have to do that rinse. If it's in an AER, the AER will do the rinse for you. If you're doing it manually, then you, of course, will have to be the one to complete that step. And then step number 5 is we have to dry it. So once you get it clean, it needs to be dried thoroughly. That's going to prevent microbial growth. We don't want to leave any type of moisture bond on the flexible scope. And then we need to hang it vertically. So with the scope itself hanging down, not horizontally. It's got to hang. It cannot touch the bottom of the cabinet. It needs to hang freely, and it needs to have proper ventilation. Okay. It's not an option. You will get cited. So some key points for the CRCST exam. Endoscopes must be leak tested before cleaning. There's never an option. It's always a leak test. The only question may be what type of leak test are you doing, but you always have to do one. They require manual cleaning and high-level disinfection or sterilization. And they use enzymatic cleaners to remove organic material. So any blood, any urine, any feces, anything left behind, that enzymatic is there to break those proteins down. All right, so that is all about the notes I have on the flexible endoscopes. Let's move into laparoscopic instruments. So this one, I know you guys have heard me say these 1,000 times, so I'm really just going to read through this and we're going to move on, because I think if y'all fill a question on that test about laparoscopic, I really did not do my job. These are long, thin instruments. They're specialized to use for minimally invasive surgeries, right? So the surgeries where they're just doing slits and they're putting the scopes and the laparoscopic instruments in. They're not opening up the cavity and utilizing retractors at that level. Then special thing to know about this that I haven't talked about as much is these are electrical surgical instruments that must be tested. So just like the scopes get leak tested to see if fluids can move back and forth, you're going to do a electrical test on these laparoscopic instruments to make sure that electricity isn't jumping where it's not supposed to go. Let me see if I can pull a video up of that real quick on YouTube for you guys. The way you're going to do this, there's usually a piece of equipment that will be at your processing desk, and you will do that test. You will do that test on all of your instruments for that tray. All right, here we go. Share screen. Sorry, TikTokies, you'll have to be on YouTube for this. So sorry. I don't see that one. Hold. There we go. Let's try that again. Share screen. Here we go. Insulation testing.
Check your tester, make sure you have battery power. Get yourself
Okay.
set up and get ready to
So that little device that she has in her hand is an insulation tester.
That we want to test is our laparoscopic.
And all of those instruments in front of her are examples of laparoscopic instruments. I also see some forceps up there, and that big white cord to the side of her is a light cord. So that's something that will get attached to those endoscopes that we saw. So what you're going to see her do is she's going to attach this InsulScan to the laparoscopic instrument, which let's get
instrument. So I'm going to connect it to my insulation.
And then that machine is going to run a current through the laparoscopic instrument. It's designed to beep if there's a failure in the insulation. And so what you would do as a technician is if it did fail its test, you would set it out for repair. And if you notice there was a little tag that was hanging on that instrument, that's a tag that we often use in the industry to note to everybody else that instrument failed the sleep test and it needs to be repaired. Don't use it in the set.
There's another fail.
Okay. So go back to your notes. All right. So if it's laparoscopic and it's got that black rubber coating on it, it has to be leaked, or it has to be have its InsulScan done. Lastly, they require their lumens to be cleaned. I ain't gonna belabor it. I know I've said it 1,000 times. So common types are going to be trocars. These are ports that allow instruments to do insertion into the abdominal cavity. They oftentimes are very sharp at the end. They're puncture instruments, so they're used to make those small holes. Then you have graspers. These are used for tissue manipulation. Scissors, just like all of the other scissors, they're used for cutting. These are just going to be smaller versions of all the bigger things that you've seen in your previous chapter. And then electrosurgical instruments that are going to be used for cauterization and cutting, right? So when we're doing all this laparoscopic surgery and we're making all of these small cuts inside of the body, oftentimes the surgeon will also cauterize the tissue as they go. So almost every laparoscopic set will need to include a cautery instrument in it. Some special considerations for these. You got to take a look at their hinges and their working tips. They must be thoroughly cleaned and tested. They're very small, so all of their hinges might be impacted. You have to check them. The insulation must be intact to prevent electrical burns. Check for cracks in the insulation. You can do that visually, but you also, as you saw, you're going to use a machine in order to help you with that process. And you have to flush the channels thoroughly and make sure they're free of debris. Now, in your processing area, you're going to be doing that with sterile water. All right, moving on to arthroscopy instruments. These instruments are used for diagnosing and treating joint conditions via small incisions. So all your little joint surgeries, little knee things, little shoulder things, little ankle things, little elbow things, these are all arthroscopic procedures. They include shavers, graspers, and probes, and they require specialized cleaning and lubrication for the same reason that the laparoscopic instruments do. They are tiny. They have tiny jaws. They're working in a tiny space, right? You could think about how big a rondure needs to be for something like an ortho. that I'm doing surgery on this big bone up here. Well, all of these tiny ones, we're talking microscopic instruments, 2 millimeter, 3 millimeter instruments. Common types of their power equipment, you got shavers. These are used to remove damaged cartilage. You have punches, which are used for cutting tissue. You guys may be familiar with punches from getting biopsies done. Those are done with instruments we call punches or rongeurs, and probes that are used for exploring joints. They're very small. Some of them are cannulated, so you would have to make sure that you're flushing them. Make sure that on the decontam side, you'll be running a brush through them. And because some of them are power equipment, they may not be able to be submerged. Some consideration, they must be properly disassembled prior to cleaning. You'll hear me say that over and over when it's regards to cleaning. So just like we drilled the fact that you cannot sterilize something that isn't clean, you cannot clean something that you did not disassemble. It's impossible. You clean the outside, but you didn't clean all the spaces where it connects. And then lastly, internal channels must be flushed. All right, so loaner instrumentation. These are instruments that are temporarily provided by manufacturers or third-party vendors for specific procedures. So we talked about this earlier, but these are not going to be instrument sets that the hospital necessarily purchases, and or they may have one or two, but they're routinely using 3 or 4, right? So they're going to borrow their instrumentation from the manufacturer. These instruments are provided by vendors for specific cases. When you work in the sterile processing department, you will become very familiar with your vendors for your manufacturers. All of the companies will have multiple people that work by region, so they will usually have a few hospitals within their system that they deal with on a regular basis. They will be the ones that will be dropping the instruments off to you, providing the IFUs, providing the set list, and letting you know when they're going to be back to come get their stuff. They can be your partners, or they can be other things. It really just depends on how you manage your department. Now, some spaces are very sophisticated. They have their vendors checking in on computer systems. They have their vendors logging and barcoding their instruments into their tracking systems. Other spaces maybe not so sophisticated, maybe still handwriting down what instrument sets they're receiving. But nonetheless, you do need to track what is coming in and out of your house, regardless of if it's a third-party manufacturer or you're sharing instrument sets between other sister hospitals. They must be fully reprocessed before you use them. There is absolutely 0% realities where a vendor drops an instrument tray off to you that you're borrowing and you take it straight to the processing room. 0% realities. It always must go to the decontam. I don't care if they bring it to you wrapped in ChemGuard and it looks like it's been cleaned and sterilized somewhere else. Unwrap it, take it to the decontam, and start your process. If you cannot guarantee sterility, you cannot use that within your facility. And it's not uncommon. I won't say it's common, but it's not uncommon for us to receive instrument trays from outside vendors and find that they weren't cleaned properly or that they're not in working order. Okay. Last thing I'll say about that is it's something you want to know at the point of drop-off because they will charge you. Okay. So if something is missing and you can't say that it was missing before you got it, or if something is broken and you can't say it was broken before you got it, they will politely charge you. If you are receiving any type of sterile goods to go along with the surgical instruments, I will highly caution you to get your OR involved before you receive those, depending on your facility, of course. It's not uncommon for them to have disposable components or single-use components that come with them. However, you guys are responsible for the surgical to get your nursing staff involved. Make sure when you are receiving loaners that you are tracking them again, so you can make sure that you get everything back to the vendor that they gave to you. Also, because there's lots of agencies that will be looking for that information on what you received, when you received it, how you reprocessed it, and when you gave it back. And lastly, I would say just from an inventory perspective, it's not uncommon for us to lose instruments within the hospital systems. You don't want to be responsible for replacing a set that nobody wanted to buy in the first place. And then lastly, when you're receiving loaners, make sure that you are closing the communication gap with your sterile processing leadership team and with your OR team. It's essential for them to know. It may be your service line leader, it may be a service lead, but it's essential for them to know what instrumentation is in the building for them and available for their use. You also want to know who to hunt down if you need to go looking for something, okay? Common types, you're often going to find these in orthopedics. You're going to find them with robotic assisted surgery, and you're going to find them for any type of specialty implant. But truthfully, when it comes to loaner instrumentation, you're going to see it across service lines. It's just like I said earlier, orthopedics and spine may utilize it more heavily, but it really doesn't matter what it is. All of them have use for borrowing instrumentation. Some considerations: they must be decontaminated, inspected, and sterilized before use. They need proper documentation and tracking, and the inventory must be checked upon receipt and return. I need to know he gave me 80 little widgets when he got here, and I gave him 80 little widgets when he left. All right. So the last thing I have on this is regulatory agencies for the flexible scopes over there reprocessing and storage. And this is really just for you guys to have notes on. As I said earlier, endoscopes are reprocessed with regular surgical instrument by everybody in the SPD department. However, and you also have some hospital systems where the reprocessing techs that do the scopes are in a separate area. But I wanted you to have access to what some of these agencies that specifically give you guidance on how to clean flexible endoscopes. So you have the FDA, which overall in general regulates medical devices, and that's who also requires the IFU to be a part of the surgical instrument. You have the CDC, which gives us some of our infection prevention guidelines. And then, of course, AAMI, which has the AAMI guidelines, but they also have a specific copy that is for flexible endoscopes. The Joint Commission, and then SGNA, which SGNA is one of those professional societies. This one is over gastroenterology, and it's nurses and associates that are working in the gastro field. So you guys will often notice, like if you're just driving down the highway, you will see the little colonoscopy sign up by the road, right? A lot of flexible scope procedures get done in offsites or surgical centers, not necessarily within the hospital system itself. So oftentimes those departments are being manned by nurses that are responsible for not only the bedside procedure, but the reprocessing of the surgical instruments themselves. And they've put together a lot of guidance on best practices on how to clean and handle endoscopes. Okay, so let's do some review questions real quick. Looks like we got about 10 minutes left, so we might get into a little bit of chapter 12 today. All right, so which type of endoscopes require a leak test before you reprocess it? A, rigid, B, semi-rigid, C, flexible, or D, arthroscopic? Let me roll this down. Wake it up, YouTube. Which one do you absolutely have to do a leak test on, no matter what? I see B, semi-rigid. I don't know what that was supposed to be. What was that? What's rabbit now? Okay. The answer to that one is C. You will always have to do a leak test on a flexible scope. Always. Now, that being said, Sabu, you're not entirely wrong. You may have to do a leak test on a semi-rigid scope depending on what type of channels it has attached to it. And then number 2, what is the primary reason for insulation testing on laparoscopic instruments? Is it A, to improve durability, B, to prevent electrical surgical burns, C, to reduce weight, or D, to check for rust? Why do we do that? Why do we test the insulation on our laparoscopic instruments every single time we receive them? Not every other time. Oh Lord, maybe I lost him. Did I? Why do we do that insulation testing? Nadia. B. I see some bees. All right, I was scared. I thought I lost y'all. I thought I was all alone. Okay. B. To prevent electrical surgical burns. Don't want to burn the patient. Don't want to burn your surgical team. Then last one I have up here for review, which agency establishes infection prevention standards for endoscope reprocessing? We just looked at that. Which one of them was on that list of folks that provide guidance on endoscopes? Howdy, TikTokies. While they doing that, if you're just joining, link in the bio will take you to the YouTube. All of the sterile processing classes that I'm offering right now are free, and they are on the live section. So if you want to go back and catch up, they're on the live section. Okay, I see a couple C's. C's. I appreciate the guesses, but nope. Okay, so the guesses was C, OSHA. And OSHA does provide guidance in the decontam room around how the staff protects themselves, right? So that's where we get that bloodborne pathogen standard from that makes it so that they have to make sure you have all of your personal protective equipment so you're not contracting any type of bloodborne diseases. I see an A. A is the correct answer, CDC. Now, if we roll back in the notes real quick, just to note, because we just finished talking about this, there are several agencies that provide guidance over your flexible endoscopes, right? CDC is one of them. Oh, okay. Let's see. I don't know if I really want to. We'll do a little bit of it, and we can review it on Monday. All right. So going into chapter 12. Before I forget, I know there were a few people that came and a few people that left. All of the notes are now up on the website. You guys can go and download them. I did put the quiz that we did at chapter 6 checkpoint is up there for your review, as well as I made a chapter quiz for everything from 1 to 12 that's up there for you. So you guys can download those from the websites if you need them. Since I gave up that Demon of Perfection, I'll also go ahead and send those out via email for you ladies that had asked for that as well. You are welcome. Okay, so real quick, so we only have a few minutes left. I'm going to get into the beginning of chapter 12, which is going to be going over assembly and packaging of the instruments, right? So looking at that life cycle of a tray, we've used them, we've cleaned them in the decontam room, we've gone through the reprocessing room, and we've looked at if they were clean. We looked at it. Are they working properly? Do I have every single one that I need for this surgical tray? I've now put it all into one little spot. I need to then package it so that it can be prepared for sterilization. Before I come into any room in the sterile processing department, dress code and hygiene is required. So you're going to require clean surgical attire. That's going to be your scrubs. If you're going into decontam, it's also going to include your gowns, right? Your PPE. But if you're coming into the reprocessing side, it's going to include your hair cover, maybe gloves for you if you're personally into wearing latex gloves over there. Not everybody does. Most people don't, and some departments won't allow you to. You need to remove your jewelry. You need not have artificial nails. I think I already gave this speech once. I'll try to make this the last time I give it to you because mostly you're all going to go off into the world and do what you want, okay? However, and there are regulations on artificial nails inside of the surgical department. They do have some guidelines on how long they can be. Generally, hygiene policies for surgical departments are going to say that you are not allowed to have them at all. That being said, I've worked in the field 16 years. I did management for 8 of it. The ladies that's going to wear the full sets are going to wear the full sets. That being said, it's imperative that your hand hygiene is above board all the time, and especially if you're going to do that, because what you are doing, if you are what you are doing is you're creating an environment that can trap a lot of bugs and transfer things around. So I just say, if you're going to be out there, you're going to do what you want, wash your hands thoroughly. You're going to remove, they say here, any heavy makeup, same thing. I'm more concerned about what's on your hands than I am about what's coming off on your face mask, things of that nature. The assembly and packaging is a clean zone. What does that mean? That means all you're bringing in there is your body with your well-washed hands, okay? You're not bringing in, preferably your cell phones, but again, people going to do what they do. If you do it on a regular, please disinfect your phone on a regular basis, please. Don't bring your soda pop can in there. Don't bring your chip bag in there. And I say these because these are things that I have found in departments before. It is not a place for you to be chilling and hanging out. It is, you need to consider it a sub-sterile space. Everything that goes from your department that's packed and ready to go is going straight into an operating room. So just please, I beg. Then your sterile storage area, these are going to be restricted access areas. So that means they're going to be restricted only to the personnel that have been cleared to come into them. You cannot be letting just general public come into these departments. I worked in a space once where a girl brought her partner to the OR after hours and she had lost her job. It's not worth the trouble. Okay? You don't want to compromise patient care or compromise yourself. All right, so that's it. We're at time. When we come back to chapter 12, I'll probably do a reminder and I'll probably beg you again about that before I release you. And then we'll look at testing and inspecting instruments, labeling the trays, and getting everything ready for sterilization. Any questions, comments, concerns, expressions of gratitude, anything before I go today? Let me look what chapter 11 and 12 has for you guys in the workbook. Wait, I was like, why is that going? we're getting close to halfway through this book. I think we just crossed over that. We got 24 chapters. Got some quizzes in there. All right. They said thank you. Well, I appreciate y'all. We'll be back on Monday at 4:45. If you're over on TikTok, go click the link in the bio. Get onto the YouTube. Look for the lives, for the reruns. Don't forget to check the website for the updated notes. And I will see you guys on Monday. Bye, Tiki.